So what we've developed and what we're showing today is the code for the BioAgent. It does the steps processing papers into what are called triples or like knowledge assets. And then it adds those knowledge assets into a knowledge graph. And it then acts in a loop to look over that knowledge graph and try to come up with a novel hypothesis, something interesting in that data that is not obvious. And it creates that hypothesis. And then lastly, we created a judge LLM that has a rubric that scores that hypothesis. So that process of ingesting papers, if there's anything new, as Ridvik showed earlier, if there's a task to process a paper, it'll do that first. And if that task doesn't exist, it has access to the knowledge graph where it can basically in a loop generate hypotheses over that knowledge graph. And so we'll show the code for that later.
So when you say knowledge graph there, just for people maybe listening for the first time, behind the scenes, there is an amalgamation of information that has been inputted through the plugin that is starting to correlate, talk to each other to have the agent be able to speak from it. Please tell me if that was correct or incorrect.
Yeah, maybe Ridvik could add some context here, but what knowledge graph is in general is that it is the relationships between nodes. Basically, entities on a knowledge graph are just nodes that can be anything. And then the edges of the knowledge graph are the connections between those nodes. And one useful way to do that is because, say you're processing 10,000 different papers, some papers will say similar things. And so in the case of that, you don't want to basically create new nodes for everything. You want to basically maybe talk about Alzheimer's disease. If 10,000 different papers mention Alzheimer's disease, you want to act on the same node and just add more relationships between other entities instead of duplicating those efforts. And so when you have a knowledge graph, it's actually easier for an agent to look at that knowledge graph and try to think of things, next steps, or things that it knows that it could add to the knowledge graph. Instead of going back to the original manuscripts, the original text data of 10,000 different papers, a knowledge graph is easier for an agent to work with.
Nice.
Yeah. Also, I'd like to add that our brains also work similar to knowledge graphs. So we have entities that, let's say, person, and maybe that person is, let's say, he's a software engineer, or maybe they go to some XYZ company. So like you make these relationships and then you try to come up with some logic behind it. Okay, so that person goes to this company, is owned by this person. So agents traverse the knowledge graph in such a way that they can come up with something novel. So let's say if a disease is related to two different proteins, or maybe not directly, maybe through a connection, but that has not been said directly anywhere. So an agent can traverse that and deduce that, okay, so if this particular disease is connected to a different protein, that is connected to some other disease, and those two diseases are connected together. It makes this connection, and things that are not said directly, it can deduce those things indirectly. So that's why we are choosing knowledge graphs over conventional databases. That's where these knowledge graphs shine for generating novel hypotheses.
The deduction, or acting as a detective in a way, is almost how researchers are done. And so a knowledge graph, just by the structure of it, an agent can deduce that an edge that is missing will be there. And it forces an agent to be insightful through both the prompt, and then the structure of the knowledge graph itself can help agents create these hypotheses.
And doing this on a blockchain, decentralized blockchain, perhaps, is from an open research perspective, it allows transparent, immutable coordination of the agents, of the research by the agents, I should say, which is what you guys are quite excited about, right? Within BioProtocol and the wider ecosystem.
Yeah, so we're going to have basically one mega graph that's on base using origin trails UKG. We also use in the demo here as like a test net. It's called OxyGraph. And we're going to just learn is that origin trail will soon support OxyGraph, which is exciting. Wrap up the slides here. Basically, we're trying to create a decentralized fleet of 1 million bioagents. It's very similar to AlphaFold at Home, which won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry last year between the Google DeepMind team and a company called Isomorphic Labs. It's very impressive what they did, but they just asked for people to donate their computer time. And they think that by incentivizing people to run agents at home or in the cloud, we can do even better. So this is using the ELIZA v2 tasks, which is a good way to structure how an agent is working through a list of tasks or multi-step tasks. Yeah, and then we're, in addition to our own plugin, we're incentivizing the creation of more plugins related to science. That's a big focus of the hackathon. Out of the almost 200 ELIZA plugins, very little relate to science. And so we want to see a lot more connections between agents in the Web2 scientific world. So that's using this, and our bio token is a part of this, and how the agents are basically, when you trust the results of agentic work from a distributed network, we use the token to incentivize people have to stake on the agents, and then there's a slashing condition if they perform either improperly or maliciously. And that's standard for a network that is distributed around the world. And we aim to have an overcapacity in the knowledge work that our agent can do. We have our own BioDAO's that are serving as a test bed and the first customers, in a sense, of what these bioagents are doing. But as we get to larger and larger number of agents, we'll have an overcapacity. And so we intend to sell access to that network of agents using the bio token. Kind of similar to renting time on a supercomputer, or having a few minutes on the Hubble Space Telescope, which is all you need in order to perform the research tasks that you have to do. This is just an overview of kind of the scientific method and how it maps to what the agent is doing. And we have, as we said, like a long running hackathon where we have total in prizes is 125K. And we just want to see scientific outcomes coming from these LIS agents. I know this is on YouTube, so I'm just going to quickly go through these. This is more about the hackathon. And lastly, I want to share something cool, which is basically there's a new thing called scientific foundation models. Like usually when LIS agents run, you give them access to say GPT 4.0, maybe O1, maybe Claude Sonnet. And these models are general purpose foundation models, but there's now something called scientific foundation models, which are starting to come out, which are meant for two examples here. One is called Evo2 by something called Arc Institute, which is around gene editing. And there's another by Google called TXGemma, which is around therapeutic biochemistry, like basically drug discovery. And so these agents, or these models, when you give agents access to these models, it changes how their quote unquote mind works. And they become much better at these specific scientific tasks, but much worse at just general knowledge and like tool usage. So I want to see people trying and creating plugins that kind of similar to OpenRouter, or basically when an agent needs to do something when it's related to these scientific fields, the core, like the underlying model, the inference model that the agent uses switches over to the scientific model. So I think that's really exciting. So this is Evo 2 and called TXGemma. So it's now surpassing the state-of-the-art results on reasoning intensive chemistry and biology tasks from these benchmarks. So I just want to, before we get into demo, like the end result is creating the structure of how an agent can think. And then once you put in these new models as the inference engine for these agents, we expect them to be very good, like surprisingly good very soon. So that is the end of the little slides here. And then we'll go back to Ridvik to share more about the actual code.
So now that we have the task inside the database, I just want to show that how the knowledge graph is getting created. Yeah. So what it does is initially it downloads the file from the Google Drive that we have here, and then it gives it to unstructured. So unstructured is like a platform which converts your PDF files into structured data, and then you can do all sorts of storing it or maybe making it into embeddings or stuff like that. So once you have the data from unstructured, we pass it inside of this function, and we use these things called ontologies. So ontologies are like a standard way for you to label your data that is not ambiguous so let's say there are some ontologies. Let me just give an example inside here. So this is an ontology which is OBI 299, which means that this particular paper has this specified output. So if a paper says that this is the output of this, we can use this particular ID. The benefit of this is that this is machine readable, and the agents can get a better insight of what, like when it's trying to generate a hypothesis, instead of using like ambiguous terms, somewhere it's written has specified output, but somewhere it is written specifies this. So ontologies serve like a standard terminologies for machines to comprehend and come up with better hypotheses.
It's also multilingual. For global languages around the world, they all have the same ontology.
Yes, exactly. So the ontologies that we have used are CHEBI is known as a chemical entities of biological interest. Then there's a disease ontology. Then we have gene ontology. So all these ontologies we've incorporated inside, converting our paper into a well-connected knowledge graph would technically require all these ontologies. There are a lot of other ontologies as well. Maybe mesh ontology is also there. Then there are UML also, like Unified Medical Biological Language. So all these ontologies will essentially make your knowledge graph more connected and more easy for the agent to traverse and come up with something novel. So yeah, this is basically, it's processing all the papers it's trying to extract. So here it got the ATC is also one of the ontologies. Then we got the gene ontologies, the disease ontologies. So yeah, like the process is quite rigorous. We want our knowledge graph to be as detailed as possible.
So the user here, the flow for somebody coming in to use the plugin, they've set up a Eliza framework, they've integrated your plugin, and then they're basically corresponding the folder to the ontology that you're referring to here, depending on the course type. And it's automatically starting the knowledge graph off the back of that. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the end user would ideally just need to set up a Google Drive.
Yeah.
Then they would need to set up OpenAI, Anthropic, and Discord for streaming the hypotheses. And there are all these variables are required. So they just need to do this setup, and then they just need to go here and drop in your PDFs, and everything will happen. Also, we also plan to create like a front end for this. So where all your hypotheses are listed. So these are some of the hypotheses that we generated from the longevity papers that we have. Then, so this is the expanded version of it. It has the research, it also has an evaluation where it has scored the hypotheses out of 100, like it gives it a score. So yeah, this is a work in progress. So this is ideally how your knowledge asset would look like. So this paper that got processed, it looked like this. So it has all these, like these ontologies. So I just showed you this one, 299, which is that the specified paper gives this particular output. So it says T cell activation is there. Then I'm not a biomolecular scientist, but it says that this paper has this specified output. And yeah, so this is quite detailed and quite like well connected. Like once this goes inside of the knowledge graph, it will be connected to many of the nodes. So all these IDs that you see, these are unique. And whenever a knowledge graph references these IDs, it gets connected to that particular node automatically. So that is why a knowledge graph is so powerful for this. And generally a better way for this to do. Also, I'd like to show you what the knowledge graph looks like. So this is OxyGraph, like this is an RDF triple store. So it currently has 3,512 triples. Let's say if your agent wants to use this knowledge graph, what it would have to do is ideally use Sparkle, which is the query language for retrieving triples. So if I want to find out all the specified output from all the papers, I would specify this ontology. That is why ontologies are powerful for this, because they serve a unified way for you to search your data. If you don't use a common language for this, LLMs tend to produce inconsistent answers. You need some kind of way for this to, when you're querying your data, you get consistent results. So that's why ontologies are so important for this. If I want to find out all the papers that have a specified output, I want to see the description. So I would just run this query and it would give me like all the papers. So we have like the paper that we have, then it would give me the findings that it has. You can make your queries much more detailed and complex to get a particular thing. And yeah, so once we have this.
Yeah, we have about 5 minutes left. Do you show how we switch the runtime to go from more turn-based conversation to running in a loop, which is something unique about this plugin?
Yeah, I would like to show the hypothesis generation part, which takes around a minute and a half to start. Choose some findings. So findings are what I just showed you on the OxyGraph. It tries to choose 2 findings that will probably be the best to connect so as to come up with a hypothesis that is novel. And then it gets the abstracts of all those papers and it gives that as a context to the LLM, and we ask the LLM to create a hypothesis. Yeah, I mean, so this is like how the hypothesis look like. It should also be there in the.
Got a question on how are you pulling through the data from Google Drive into Eliza? How have you managed to do that?
Okay, so Google Drive has this feature called watching a folder, where you can essentially watch a folder and you give in an API URL to so you specify a channel name and you specify a callback URL that you want Google Drive to send notifications to. So inside of the code, that would look like this.
Okay.
So inside routes, we have Google Drive and then the webhook. So as soon as there is some change inside of the Google Drive, this particular route is called, and this is where we then listen for the changes. And there is also an API for seeing all the changes that are there, and then we compare it with the database, and whatever changes are there, we sync it. So that is how we have done it.
And of note is that the route is new to the V2 Eliza.
Interesting. That's a, as you're familiar with MCP servers, that's an alternate way to basically call an API.
Yes.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you so much for joining. It's been an absolute pleasure. And this is super, super interesting. Keen to see what comes out of the hackathon. Keen to see how this continues to develop. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what's next. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Eliza.
Thank you.